I'll start with a brief overview of metamodernism and then talk about why the winning meme is such a big part of that. And I'm going to be brief and a little bit oversimplified, so forgive me, anybody who is extremely well versed in the nuances of modernism or postmodernism. But for the sake of simplicity and brevity, I'm going to say that modernism basically consists of attempts to generate big stories that answer all the big questions. So, the religions have all in their own way sort of explained why everything is and how to comport yourself and everything you need to know. And then there are, secular philosophies and scientific materialism and a number of modernist attempts to have a big answer to all the big questions. And then comes along postmodernism, and postmodernism is basically defined by a skepticism that any one of these has really got the right answer. And so postmodernism has been working on our culture, on our once modern culture. Postmodernism has been meeting and debating and confronting all the modernists of all the religions and all the philosophies and saying things like, how do you really know that? How do you justify? Can you really prove that? What do you say about everybody who disagrees with you? Why are you in the minority if you've got the truth? And as our culture has been having these debates, the consensus that culture seems to be coming to is that the postmodernists are basically, at the very least, they're winning these debates. Modernist perspectives are becoming less and less respectable. It feels a little bit naive these days to buy into any system that says it has all the answers. And so we're sort of feeling the effects of that as we have lost the cultural and psychological foundations on which we used to rely for understanding our place in this world. What are we doing here? In what context are we living out our lives? What for? And how do we make it better? And as we're struggling, as we're losing touch with modernist ideas, as we're becoming more postmodern, it feels like we're feeling the effects of this. It feels like we're generating more crises than we can resolve. And I don't know if there's a good scientific measure of this, but it a little bit feels like the rate of crisis generation is accelerating, and our ability to solve crises has been getting worse. And this, in metamodernism, we call the meta crisis. It's sort of this idea that as the list of crises gets longer and longer, at some point, there's not much use in examining them one by one. It's not like we can solve them anyway. So we just compress the whole list down to the meta crisis and say the meta crisis is we generate crises faster than we resolve them. We don't know where to go from here. Nobody seems to have a plan that looks like it will work. And there doesn't seem to be, it's not like it's off by a close margin either. It looks like nobody has even the slightest idea. And so metamodernism comes into this picture and tries to step forward from postmodernism, partially because there's a philosophy, there's something that comes after. We want to advance in understanding. But partially because if we don't move on from postmodernism, it's not clear where we will derive the necessary transformation to move into an upward trajectory. However, it's very difficult to justify moving on from postmodernism. That's why it succeeds so much. They keep winning the debates. Like nobody can answer their questions. Everybody looks silly when they say anything. You say anything too passionate with certainty, and you're just going to look like a fool when the postmodernist breaks it down and you can't answer pretty important questions about it. And so metamodernism attempts to move on not by proposing a new theory of everything. That would kind of just be like another modernist attempt. Instead, metamodernism, instead of giving answers, focuses on questions. It says something like, stop trying to solve all the crises and acknowledge the meta crisis, which is just our generalized insufficiency in the face of a mounting series of crises. And acknowledging that is the first step towards moving on to the next step. And so acknowledging that we don't have answers, all we have are questions, is a more healthy and potentially fruitful way to at least start to get our heads around what are we going to do about all these crises. And metamodernism says something like, we can't solve them. Us here in 2024, we are clearly not up to the task. And it doesn't look like we're close. So the idea that, some genius is going to put it all together, I mean, maybe they do it better than anybody ever did it before, by like 5 or 10% better. That's usually how it goes, That's not going to do it. So what are we supposed to do? And metamodernism says, don't try to come up with an answer. Acknowledge that we can't do it. Acknowledge that it is beyond what we have at our disposal right now. And say something like, where could the ability to become more efficacious come from? That is outside of our system, lurking somewhere in the shadow of the human dialectic. And if we can find and integrate that, then maybe we can become the version of ourselves as a species that hasn't just produced many, many wonderful cultural products and wisdom and insights, but has actually integrated them. And if we get to that point, because we have not remotely integrated all of humanity's cultural productions and made them work together, we've mostly kept them isolated from each other. But if we get to that point, what do we find? Well, I have no idea because we haven't done it yet. But once we're there, once we've integrated these insights, we'll be in a far better position to assess the playing field and maybe come up with some amazing solution that is apparently invisible to everybody right now. It's a bold, ambitious idea, and it would kind of be surprising if it worked. Like, if we're going to get some sort of surprisingly fast transformation, well, that would be surprising, wouldn't it? Probably not going to happen. But if it were to happen, how could it happen? And that's where we come to the winning meme. So a meme is a word. It was coined by Richard Dawkins. It's meant to sound sort of like a gene because it functions similarly. So, a gene influences the creation of an organism and helps that organism survive and pass on its genes. And so the gene gets to live on in the descendants. A meme is very much the same, but it is a thought rather than a piece of genetic information. It's mental information. And when we think different thoughts, some of them really catch us. We think of one and then it sticks or it grips us or we grip it. We keep our attention on it. And other thoughts, we think of them and then we forget about them forever. They're not very memetically successful. They don't have a lot of descendants. Other memes, when you see it, you start spreading it to everybody else. Certain memes have spread throughout the whole world. Very successful memes. Not all good. Many memes succeed by making themselves very sticky, often by making it very difficult to let go of them. They win by making you afraid to stop looking at them or afraid not to share them. They win by making you feel guilty or sad or ashamed or whatever. That's one way you can succeed as a meme. And if that's the shape of the winning meme, that would be unfortunate. But let's talk about what I mean by the winning meme. In this memetic battle royale, right? All the memes competing all in parallel at the same time. Battle royale. Some meme must come out on top. Some meme is going to come out as the winning one. We don't know what it is, or presumably would have won, because that's what the winning meme would do. But whatever it is, it must be an extraordinarily successful meme. Must have the ability to create descendants like mad and fill the world. So how could that be possible? You would think, you would think that memes, some can be more effective than others. But the idea of one like sweeping the world in a runaway process because it's whichever meme happens to be the best at this kind of thing. seems a little far-fetched. But if you start to think about which traits could theoretically contribute to memetic success, you can start to form a picture and understand, okay, I mean, some meme must be the winning one. It must be really good at spreading. And I can start to see why it might spread so well. And so what are some of the traits that the winning meme might possess? Unlike many other memes, perhaps the winning meme does not compel. It doesn't make you afraid to look away from it. It invites, but it does not compel. Now, why might the winningest meme of all have that trait? Well, the problem with these sticky memes is they weaken their carriers. Like, you need your carriers to pass you on, but you're kind of in a competition with your own carriers. You know, you're weakening them, making them feel bad, making them have all these issues so that you can get them to do something for you. Well, that's a strategy. But what if there was a meme that made the carrier stronger? Okay. Well, that would certainly contribute to memetic success. All the people who carry the meme get stronger. That's going to be very impressive to anybody who doesn't have the meme. It'll make them interested in it. It'll make them take it more seriously. That's a good trait for a meme to have. So whatever the winning meme is, perhaps it strengthens its carriers rather than weakens them. And perhaps an important part of that is not compelling, which could also be important if one reason the winning meme wins is that it transforms opponents into either allies or sources of memetic success. Because in this battle royale, I mean, the more memes you have fighting against you, getting in your way, the harder it is for you to come out on top. You know, some memes win themselves a lot of enemies. The whole world conspires against them, and then they don't win, do they? On the other hand, suppose a meme, and let me clarify, like we say it's an idea. A meme can really have any shape at all. Like, we can say, whoa, does the winning meme exist? It's like, that's not really the point. It's just the shape of an idea. It's implicit in concept space. We scan that space with our intelligence. And apparently we haven't found it yet. But when we find it, it doesn't matter if it has a real world counterpart or not. It's just an idea, but apparently a very memetically successful one. And so one of the reasons this meme might succeed might be that when it meets an opponent, it says something like, hey, if I win this memetic battle royale and you're on my side, I will lift you up. My success means your success. You know, instead of like taking as much glory as possible for myself or something, I'll distribute it. You know, I'll share it with you. So don't fight me so hard. You know, even if you don't join me, you don't need to fight me as hard as you fight others. Because if they win, you lose. But if I win, everyone wins. Maybe the most successful meme succeeds because it offers to share its victory with every other meme. And, you know, I don't know the particulars. Does it only provide this to those who team up with it? Is that the successful strategy? Maybe it provides it even to those that oppose it. I mean, imagine fighting an opponent when you know that if they win, you're going to have an awesome time. It's like, it's hard to muster the same destructive intention, you know? Especially when this is one opponent. If you lose to this one, you have a great time. You got all these other opponents that if they win, you're going to have a horrible time. So all the more reason for you to say, well, if this one happens to be winning, I don't have to devote too many resources to getting in the way of that. And maybe even a large group of other concept shapes would respond to that sort of dynamic by teaming up, so to speak, by saying, look, so there's like an infinite number of memes. They can take on literally any shape. I'm probably not going to win. Even if I try my hardest, I'm probably going to lose. So if I'm going to lose, maybe I'll throw in with somebody else who I hope will win for me. And who's most likely to win? Whoever builds the biggest coalition. So whichever meme is most appealing to the most possible other memes and is willing to share its victory with the most other possible memes. these are other traits that might contribute to whatever the winning meme's runaway success looks like. Another idea here is, another way to put this is, okay, let's say the winning meme sweeps the world. It wins. What does that look like? It's not replacement. It's not substitution. It's not conquest and the elimination of competitors. When you, like postmodernism, if metamodernism wins, that doesn't mean the end of postmodernism. It means the preservation of postmodernism and the bringing it into its best possible light. And it means the revival of modernism and bringing all the best of them into their light. And maybe that's part of another reason the winning meme wins. Maybe it wins because it is willing to learn from its opponents. It is willing to learn from all other memes. Any meme that doesn't have that trait is going to be at a competitive disadvantage, isn't it? So these are some thoughts about what kind of traits might allow the most successful meme of all, whatever it is, it has to be something, to succeed. And as I start to as I've thought through these, it's an interesting echo of less memetically oriented language, but some of the wisest people of all time have said things like, love will save the world. Love could potentially sweep the world, or God is love. And I'm talking about these successful memetic traits, and it's like it shares its victory, it learned from its opponents, it takes their side, it brings the best out of them, It's almost like it wins by caring the least about winning for its own sake. And it spreads the victory around as much as possible. And that's a pretty good way. There's that temptation. Like, if I can get on top, I want to enjoy it. That's going to keep me from getting on top, though. If I'm willing to give up everything I get if I get on top, then that gets rid of a big obstacle to success. And so, were these people talking about, did they know what they were talking about? Is there not just any old kind of love? That's a little passe, a little naive. But is there a specific, wise, carefully designed sort of decision procedure or game theoretical strategy, which resembles, you could shorten it, you could say it's basically like love. Maybe that really is the winning meme. Except it can't be, because it hasn't won. In fact, it's completely failed. I mean, look at the world. Did that work? Did somebody say love will do it and then love did it? No, completely failed. And maybe it's just that was the wrong kind of love. It's not as simple as just saying love. It's like, well, there's a more particular strategy here that we're talking about. It's not as simple as, I don't know, feeling good about people or something. Maybe the version of love we've been trying is a sort of perverted, weakened version of love, which does not have the traits I just described. The version of love we've been trying in our culture doesn't look like what I described. It doesn't offer to share its victory with its opponents. Does love, as we have been trying it in our culture and as a species, does that kind of love offer to share its victory with hatred? Does the kind of love we've been trying love bad things? Or do we hold up this type of love and practically worship it, and in the name of worshiping it, justify rejecting anything that isn't it, separating it from the rest of the world? Well, no wonder that strategy would fail. It makes enemies of everybody. You find the one amazing, perfect thing, and you immediately oppose it with every other thing beneath it, because it's beneath, it's not good enough. Well, that doesn't seem like it would be memetically successful in the same way. It's making opponents instead of allies. It's breaking down coalitions instead of creating them. And so maybe what we've been getting wrong is that we've been preaching and trying to live out a sort of perverted version of love that doesn't lead to us acting with love. It leads to us acting with hatred and rejection and so forth in the name of love. So we talk about love all the time, but that's not the same thing as doing it. We say that too, but the implication is kind of, oh yeah, really do it, really go out and change the world, really go out and like fight the bad people. It's like, no, I mean, yes, but can you love them while you're fighting them? Can you love the worst opponents on the planet and far worse ones that could exist? If you can't, anything you reject will oppose your victory for good reason, at least for good selfish reason. But if you're on literally everything's side, or at least you wish you could be, you can't give power to certain horrible things. But if you can love them, you can throw them a bone at least. If you can find a way to give them something, then that is a memetically successful strategy potentially to reduce opponents, to build a coalition, and to learn from these horrible things. It's hard to find pure darkness. Even the darkest thing any of us have ever witnessed in the real world was never pure darkness. And that means there was always some element of light in it. But to be willing to learn from such horribly dark things, I mean, sure, it's successful. Sure, you learn, you become more powerful. Maybe it helps you be the winning meme. But to love such horrendous things, I mean, it's unspeakable, it's unthinkable to us in this world. And we don't seem to be doing a very good job, though, do we? So it sounds crazy, but to love hatred, to be tolerant of intolerance, to be accepting of not accepting, and to even be willing to learn from these things. To say, look, I have my judgments about hatred, but somewhere in there is some tiny, tiny, tiny little nugget of wisdom I can use to be stronger than I would be if I just refused, if I was completely closed to it. I want to be open to closed-mindedness, and not just in a shallow way that would insult closed-mindedness. No, genuinely learn from it. Give it a voice. Let it participate in the whole. It doesn't necessarily mean you put it in charge. Even if you found pure darkness from which you could learn absolutely nothing, that is a really convenient tool for knowing where not to go. You just turn that on its head and you've got a great trajectory. So even pure darkness is extremely useful in that sense. And so maybe the winning meme, which has not been tried, maybe it really is love, but not the kind of love we've been trying, not the kind that makes enemies everywhere it goes and puts down everything for not being as perfect as it. Maybe the kind that makes friends everywhere it goes and actually wants its opponents to exist and wants them to succeed and wants itself to succeed so as to help them succeed. It's a very tempting memetic offer. And you could see how it could build up a coalition of allies, so to speak. And the more allies that come to it, I mean, even if you think you can go toe-to-toe with one of these big memes, but this loving meme, this radical love one that learns from everything and accepts everything, it's so tough to beat because so many other things keep joining it. How are you supposed to compete with that? It's impossible. So you might even reject it, but then eventually see the light and say, look, I'm not going to win against that massive coalition. That's just too persuasive. I might as well join in. And if other people are thinking like that, maybe you jump in even faster. You see the writing on the wall. So these are a few of the traits that seem like they might contribute to the kind of unprecedented memetic success that could, in theory, lead to the sort of quick transformation that would be surprising, but might be surprisingly more possible than you would think. That the hint has been given to us that we actually have sort of had the answer, and we've just been performing a perverted version of it. And so we think we've seen what it can do for us, but no, we've only seen what this weak, perverted version of it can do for us. If we find the right shape, maybe it looks like love. We find the right shape, the most powerful meme? Well, it might be love. It might be love. It might be something else. I don't know. Every meme exists in potential, in concept space. There's like things nobody has ever thought about before. Maybe something out there outcompetes anything I can imagine, anything anybody can imagine. Maybe. I don't know. But I could see, or I imagine I can see anyway, how the right flavor of love could meet resistance and only get stronger from it. And that's the game every meme is in. Every meme's trying to expand, that they're all in this finite space. So the more everybody's trying to expand, you're pushing up against each other. They're all getting squeezed up tight, and you're in this big battle, and whoever can push the others around the hardest maybe wins. Maybe. Or maybe not. Maybe it's something that doesn't seek to win for its own sake, doesn't seek to exclude, but rather meets resistance and loves that resistance and says, you know what, you are right to resist me, at least partially right. There's wisdom in your perspective. I want to learn everything from it, and I want to make sure that it guides us, because we don't want your voice to be left out. You're an essential part of the most powerful coalition possible, and we want the most powerful coalition possible, and that means we're not willing to leave anybody out if we can manage it. That could be a very powerful memetic strategy. Could it be the winning meme of all possible winning memes? The meme that, by definition, once it is discovered, will spread successfully? I don't know. I mean, it hasn't spread that far yet. Takes some amount of time, hopefully not too long. If it were to spread, then I think it would be our best attempt at becoming the version of ourselves that would be capable of handling the meta crisis. And I think, in my opinion, metamodernism correctly acknowledges that we are not up to that task. We're going to have to become different if we're going to change the trajectory of our world. And it seems to me that there might be more hope for that than you might think, in the sense that surprising progress might be surprisingly accessible. That the winning meme can act very fast. If we find it, it'll work very fast, whatever it is. If it's something like love, it'll also act wonderfully, to help us learn from each other, unify, harmonize, not get rid of postmodernism or modernism or anything, but love all of them and bring them all into the best position possible. You see what I'm talking about when I'm like, if you're like, we're going to sweep the world, we're going to replace everything else. Well, now everything else wants to oppose you, doesn't it? But if you're like, we're going to sweep the world and you're all going to be there, and we're going to help you achieve more of what you want, and we'll work together so that when you're pursuing something, everybody else is willing to join in, so everybody achieves more of what they want. These are the traits that could lead to a runaway memetic process that potentially alters the way we relate to each other. And I think this applies fractally, in the sense that these principles apply both to individual people and organisms, and also interpersonally and ultimately globally. That just as the resistance within my own body, mind, arises in response to things, do we not often respond to these things with the perverted version of love? When hatred or jealousy or intolerance rises within me, don't we kind of reject it and tell it that it has no place here? But what if you were to love these horrible things within you, accept them, give them a place, instead of making enemies of all of the resistances within your own body and mind? There's a pattern that can bring them all together and help them all participate with each other's aims. And when the whole body and whole mind participates in whatever you're doing, it succeeds so much more impressively, or whatever, than if the thing had to go at it alone. And I'll say even this, I'll say that even if some other meme thinks it could go toe to toe and thinks it could take the crown, even if it won, it would actually have a worse time than if it lost to a meme that incorporated everything and provided support to the other thing, to the other meme. So you can be sort of, you can take the crown and be alone, or you can like not take the crown and have everybody else helping you achieve your aims when it's your turn. And so the idea there is, that's another reason the winning meme wins, is that it's actually better for every other meme to lose to it. On their own terms, it's better for them to lose to it. So that's another reason the winning meme might have this sort of shape, because it has to be able to deal with the inevitable resistance it's going to meet. And to be able to transform that resistance into greater wisdom, greater strength, greater power, a stronger coalition, that is the key to being able to meet what would have been opponents, turn them into allies, and spiral in this runaway process that can sweep the world without sweeping it clean. The only thing I'll say here about what the winning meme cannot offer, if it has the shape or something like the shape I've been describing, is relative position. As far as I can tell, it's just logically impossible to offer everyone the relative position they might want. When I talked about how it's better not to have the crown, you'll have everybody helping you, that's having higher absolute value. But it's accepting having a lower relative position. And so that's sort of the question any meme would have to face when deciding if it was willing to throw in with the winning meme or not. Am I willing to accept a lower relative value for the sake of my own personal, selfish, absolute value going up? And maybe in some sense, it seems like a very deep question. Like, do I want real value or do I want to be above others? And those two things pull against each other very hard. And the more you're willing to be beneath others, not necessarily that you have to be, but you're willing to be, the more you have the potential to have more absolute value. But the more you want to turn your absolute value into relative advancement, the more you've lost the absolute value for the sake of this hierarchical advancement. Which is not to be anti-hierarchy. You know, the winning meme loves everything. Hierarchies have their place. I'm sure we can learn a lot from them. And I'll say that about any possible thing, any possible objection, any possible thing. It'll be like, that is a great idea. I love that idea. There's a lot to learn about that. Those are criticisms that we will incorporate into our strategy and become stronger by so doing. And that's the pattern. Maybe that's the pattern. That's my best guess at the pattern that could potentially win in the end, and in the right circumstances, win fast. And I personally feel that we need to win pretty fast. As I look at the meta crisis, it seems like there's like several on that list that could go really badly if we don't manage them well. And there's several on that list that we've already tried to manage a few times, and we've already shown what our track record is. And so if we keep doing about that good, presumably the trajectory doesn't change. So we need to change before any one of them gets too bad. And the question is, how long do we have until the first one of them gets too bad? I don't know. But I have some hope that there exists a sufficiently powerful pattern that could lead to sufficiently fast progress that we could become the better version of ourselves as a species that would be capable of addressing the meta crisis and presumably producing a better society than any we've had so far, integrating the cultural products of all the different systems ever produced, bringing them together, learning from each other. I mean, you know, I don't hate the system we're under. I think there's so much that's great about it. And I would say, for example, don't tell this story that we'll overthrow the rich and powerful and then put them under the guillotine. Well, that's just going to make them oppose you really hard, isn't it? What if the story was, if we win, your lives get even better. Like everything you can get with money, like nothing is no comparison to what you can get and what everyone can get without money, or maybe there's money, but without having all the money. And we're not here to threaten you. We're here to improve your lives and our lives and everything and everywhere and everything, you know? Yeah. So I think that about wraps it up. The winning meme is my best guess as to the pattern that can potentially integrate the world, harmonize it, and possibly help us progress fast enough to manage the meta crisis fast enough to stave off potential disasters. And that's the winning meme.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Hunter. That was just brilliant. Simply loved it. I have several observations, but I'm going to first let other people comment or ask questions. We've done, about 1,800 meetups here on Zoom at 52 Living Ideas. And one of the formats that we use that has worked really well for us, we've got 4 rules. Number 1, raise your hand in Zoom or type an exclamation mark when you want to comment. Number 2, keep on topic. We're talking about the winning meme. Number 3, be brief and concise. Make every minute count. At number 4, feel free to disagree with anybody on anything, but do so courteously. That's it. Okay, so let's go to questions. We got 3 people in line. Let's go with them. I'll hold my comments till later. It's going to be Chris, Munzer, and Remco. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say thank you so much for the introduction. When I showed up, I thought it was going to be potentially a bullshit meaning about love going to solve everything, but I think you nailed it. I think you really showed the weaknesses of the current perspective, but maybe what we're looking for as well. And I feel like we do have the answer. But I wanted to first just highlight that the naive kind of love, I think we've tried with religion, right? Like the kind of Freudian love where we love those who like us for what we like about ourselves, kind of love that you force people to conform is the only way to have love, right? And then we came to the modern era with where relativism and postmodernism became so popular because we understood anthropology, we understood that there are different valid perspectives, but now we have these giant cultures merging, and the only way we could solve that was really just to say, keep doubling down, like, oh, let's just love everyone, no matter who they are. And we just ended up in a complete relativistic viewpoint where love doesn't mean anything. And really, the only thing that can resolve conflict is power struggles. Because if every perspective is valid, then it's the winner. The winner is the only one that's in the right, which I think we see in postmodernism and relativism, how, violence is the only thing. So I think that I really like to carry your attributes of the winning meme, like strengthen the carrier, and the other should win over the other memes. And I think the alternative potentially is reasoning, right? We can, if we understand like that we share a natural environment and we use kind of modern science or the modern reasoning, philosophical kind of theories, we can all agree on the logic, we can all agree on some basic ways in which we negotiate and communicate. And then, like you said, it doesn't matter if something bad is happening, then we can all learn from it rather than reject it, right? So we need to find that common language, and maybe that's what we attach to. That's the new love, right? We attach to this common language and common way to talk to each other, reason with each other.
Right.
That's
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. One of the weaknesses of the sort of weak version of love that's been tried is that it's so rejecting of like wisdom, rigor, precision, and frankly, things like discrimination and intolerance. Like, these are not the highest values, some of them, but they have perspectives worth incorporating, And yes, love can unite disparate perspectives, but the version of love we've been trying has a little bit been eliminating disparate perspectives forcing them into a singular category. Well, no wonder nobody wants to join. To join you means to leave the other thing. But what if there was a version that could stay with your thing and participate in a more collective, universal principle at the same time? That has some chance of success.
Excellent.
So
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
experimentation, yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Next up is going to be Manzur, Remco, and then me. Manzur, go ahead.
Hi, so this is my first time here. I'm Manzar Haq. Can you folks hear me okay?
Very
Yes.
well. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, so these are very interesting topics. I like it. So there's a meme and other things. Before we decide how to do it, first we have to decide what to do it. Well, what's the goal? That has to come first. Then we will decide, okay, how to reach that goal. So I would like somebody to shed light on that how to decide what's the best goal. Then you figure it out what's the best strategy would be to reach to that goal. And that's a very tough call to deciding what the really goal is. And as far as the meme is talking about, the meme sounds like Richard Dawkins. He's the one who came up with this term, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of a spread of idea, like it grows like a virus, like a crystal, like a snowball. So when I look at the history of thousands of years, people try to name various means by force, by power, by sword, by ideas, by love, sometimes a combination of both. One of the best meme spread is like, let's say, Jesus Christ, what he did. Man. It was so powerful. People were willing to give their life for it. And then another person is Muhammad. But he combined both methods. He did some preaching, plus he used the sword too, with power of sword. But Jesus Christ's method, according to the historical record, neither you nor I lived in that time, so we don't know what happened actually. We can talk about what is in the book recorded. We don't know who wrote the book, but only on the basis of historical what people talk about it. Jesus did not use the power of sword or force, so his method was slow in progress. And Muhammad used both. He used the power of sword, but very rapidly, his idea, his meme, is spread from Saudi Arabia to all this neighboring Middle East. It becomes so powerful. And he literally used sword. He put the sword on the people's neck. Hey, you don't convert to Islam? Here, pop, cut his neck off. Now Hitler tried to do that. Genghis Khan did that too. All those things. So sounds like the goal is basically nothing but control other people. No matter how you slice it, dice it, cut it, control other people's mind, one way or the other. I would like to hear other people's thought on this. What should be their goal, and then how to achieve this? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Manzur. Great points. Hunter, if you could go ahead and address the question that Manzur asks.
Sure.
What is the goal?
Yeah. Well, I think my personal philosophical perspective is that all systems of knowledge are ultimately built on axioms, which are not only currently unproven, but which, as far as I can tell, will be eternally unprovable. That ultimately we can't actually prove that we know anything. And so the idea of making a rigorous and principled case for why this goal versus that goal or anything, postmodernism will always be able to ask why, and it'll ultimately bottom out in axioms, and we'll say we're just assuming the axioms are true. And then postmodernism will say that's not a very convincing story. And so when I say that metamodernism doesn't try to give answers, one piece of this is to say something like, if you don't find it persuasive why we're doing this, we can't prove it to you with a rigorous, reasoned case. You're perfectly free to, follow postmodernism if you want to do that. And if you ever shift over to wanting to do something that hopefully works rather than can be justified, then that's what we're doing. And we're not waiting to figure out how to justify it, because as far as I can tell, it's impossible.
Thank you. Thank you, Hunter. Next up is going to be Remco, followed by David, and then me. Remco.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I tuned in with the intention of defending postmodernism, but
I love that.
I might come back on that, but you know what? You spent a fair bit of time at the end, Hunter, talking about memes, and I thought, yes, okay, fair enough. What I jumped to was Yuval Harari, and Yuval Harari has got a fair bit of prominence in the world now as a professor of military history, and he makes the point that the thing that distinguishes us humans from chimpanzees, which is his example, is that we create narratives and we live into these narratives. You call them memes, I call them narratives, or call them stories, whatever you like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And these stories are very comfortable for us. Would it be stories of religion or stories of nationalism or whatever other stories you might like to weave? But they're a source of bonding. And you're right, I agree with you. You know, you just, I think I agree with you that, you know, destroy a story and you destroy a culture. And that was really well illustrated back from the time of, you know, let me give an example of 1517 when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the wall. And what happened? There was a fuse, wasn't it? It was a fuse, and it took 150 years, and it culminated with the most vicious war that this world has seen. That was the 30 Years' War. Not many people have heard of it, but it took 150 years for that grand meme, religion, to be handed over, the baton of power, which I see religion to be, 150 years for that baton to be handed over to the state. And the cross became a flag. And so, but there was a turmoil, and I see that happening right now. I think the state is under challenge. And what do we see? We see that turmoil. So I partly agree with you. And partly, I would like to say that I'm not so concerned about postmodernism. I think for me, it's been extremely valuable. It has given me a way of looking at the world. And you know, the damn thing about postmodernism is it's very hard to define. You can say it in an apophatic. It's not this, it's not that. Or if you like, in the Sanskrit, neti, if anybody, you know, it's not. And that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. You say, what the hell are you talking about? Well, postmodernism makes things visible. You know, it identifies the cage of our narratives. And crikey, you know, I'm the oldest man here now, and I got a bag full of stories, and a lot of them I accumulated at university with some 9 years there, I think, if I worked it out, remember right. And yeah, so postmodernism is, it makes these stories visible. And gee, I got a lot of strength out of it. I really wouldn't be so worried. However, I take your point about the memes. That's why I'm just a bit of a double banger here. I should have stopped a few moments ago when I was talking about the winding up of the grand narratives. But I really do believe that postmodernism makes things visible. It made my cage visible. I had a cage, a beautiful bird cage, and I began to see all of the blah that's around me. And should we be worried about postmodernism? Oh, look, you know, it's a school of thought in part of the continental school, if you like, dominant in the other world. And, you know, the English-speaking world is the analytical school, and they're just as prominent. I really wouldn't be worried about defining yourself in reaction to. Don't do that. Define yourself as something that nurtures, and you know, metamodernism you might see as a bit of an antidote or a palliative or a sweetener or something for that change. I don't know. I don't know that there is a need for that, quite frankly. You introduced the word love. I don't know what love is. In fact, I'll go one step further. I suggest there is no such thing as love. Wonderful. I don't think it exists. It's your natural state. And Brené Brown, if anybody's heard of him, makes the point very clear. Anyway, look, this is long. This is hardly a question. I'm sorry, this is a bit of a dissertation, but I just wanted to say that Look, I love postmodernism for making things visible. It's creating empathy. It helps me see the other world. It's helped me see power and hubris. And I think beyond that, I don't know. I think I'd be more relaxed than you are, Hunter. But anyway, that's my view. I don't know whether I'm making any sense to you, but just wanted to say a long rambling thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Remco. Go ahead, Hunter.
Yeah. I think if we need somebody to articulate why postmodernism is wonderful, we'll come to you, Remco. That's the most impassioned approval of postmodernism I've ever heard. And I have to say, I've benefited immensely from postmodernism. Like, I can't imagine what I feel like I would know almost nothing if postmodernism hadn't been born in the world in time for me to benefit from it. So I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think it's the standard metamodern analysis says something like we want to oscillate between modernism and postmodernism. So the idea is that postmodernism is not the enemy. It's only the enemy if it's taken to an extreme and isolated.
Thank you, Hunter. I really like the point that Remco made, is that what postmodernism did was that before that, lots of people were living in the cages of their own ideas with this confirmation bias. And what postmodernism did was to tear that up and show you the kind of the holes in that. And if you choose to accept that, and I think a lot of the wisdom begins with seeing that you are wrong about things. And that's the beginning. That's not the end, but it's the beginning. And if somebody frees you from something that you've been kind of, you've been locked into, then that is something of value. So thank you. Next up is going to be David, followed by D. We'll go the first, people who have not spoken before, we'll go to everybody first, and then we will do the seconds, Chris, okay? So give me just a second. David, it's you next.
Okay. A lot to think about here that's going on. One of the things, Hunter, you talked about metamodernism not having answers. Well, I think of Hansi's book, The Listening Society, and I thought the Listening Society is, in some sense, an answer. I deeply believe in what he outlined as a desirable thing to have. In that sense, an answer. I might be a little overly optimistic for this group. I'm not sure. And I think come back to love, and that's one of the things. I don't think we should love hatred, but I think we should love the person who hates. And I think that's an important distinction. That we have to have values that distinguish what we're going to do and how we're going to do things. Let's see, what other notes did I have here? Let's see, what other place to go here? For me, love is, from what you said, Henry, it sounded like you didn't see love as being very effective. And maybe because it hasn't swept the whole world and we've all come to love each other. I think it's important to realize that it hasn't been that long since the world had contact around the world. And I think of the Whole Earth Catalog. In 1972, I taught a course called Applied Whole Earth Catalog, and it was based on the first picture of the globe. There was a mental effect to that to me it was like seeing a oneness of everybody. That we have something. We have this one small planet when seen from outer space. And that happened at a time when just all these world cultures were coming in contact with each other. And my roots go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I've had the model for that course on Applied Whole Earth Catalog was essentially that we would have a strategy of meeting these needs. First of all, the aim would be to meet everybody's physiological needs, and then the safety needs, and the self-esteem, and social, And then he talked about the people who, as he saw as these gifted people, they tended to have these peak experiences, which the way he described them pretty much fit the mystical experience. And so I see the mystical experience as in some sense the source of love. That if you and part of that experience is an experience of beyond time and space, where everything is interconnected, and love has been one of the themes of most religions. And I think if we can have the religions of the world interacting with each other and sharing their perspectives, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Parliament of the World's Religions. They met in the United States in, I think it was 1893. It was the first meeting ever of leaders from all of the world's religions. And they did it again in 1993. It was a centennial. And I see, I get in, the integral philosophy, and then like spiral dynamics, and there were a few others, and then the metamodernism, which I see as kind of a logical step after all that. So I probably said enough for now. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Great comments. Hunter, if you want to comment, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, I think love of the kind that's been tried has often been a little bit against certain types of wisdom, of like discrimination. Like love itself, I don't think weakens, not even the love of hatred. But you need to be able to love the rejection of hatred too. You need to be able to love the wisdom that discriminates between hatred and love. And then do you actually need to love hatred itself? Maybe we only need to love hateful people. I don't know, maybe. What's more powerful? Other people, some of them, seem to like hatred. And so if we want them to be allies, are they more likely to be allies if we are willing to take on their perspective, even if just for a moment? Maybe. And so maybe part of the radical and successful love is that anything anybody has ever loved, it is willing to love as well. And then it's willing to love the wisdom that rejects like a lot of things that should not be instantiated in the world.
Thank you, Hunter. Next up is going to be Dee. We're going to go with people who have not spoken first, and then we'll go for the second rounds. Dee, go ahead.
I thank you for your presentation, Hunter. That was great. Making a big case for, what might be possible. And
Maybe.
yeah, hey, I'm right with you there. I'm not as passionate as my husband about the postmodernism. I like what it's made visible to people, but the deconstruction side of it, I think, has perhaps been, maybe you need the boat to be rocked, but I think human beings in general don't like the boat to be rocked. So some damage can be done in having them on board for something new, because they're already in a state of chaos and insecurity, unpredictable. They want things to be predictable. Make America great again is the most crazy slogan I've ever heard, because it's as Remco says about stories, it's a stupid story that's not even relevant to today. But what they're crying out is, give us something stable and predictable at the cost of the more beautiful possibilities. They'd rather have, it's what they used to or think they used to something new. So my dilemma there is, so how do we present this to people? It seems that fear is the strongest motivator rather than love. Present some good news, and how many readers do you get? Not many. Present something awful, and they're right in there, sort of groveling around in the dirt. I know it's been said to be a survival thing, know what your enemy is, know what's going wrong so that you can sort of be prepared for it, all that sort of protective behavior. So the dilemma there is how to get that collaboration and sort of community spirit. Religion has managed it in many instances, but they've also exploited it. Once you've got a group cohesively sort of pulling together en masse, you can influence them. And that's sort of quite disappointing. So I don't know if you have thoughts around how that can happen and whether we actually need to play on people's fears, because basically the religions that has community is based on fear that there isn't an afterlife. And we're going to do this all together because we're going to be good people who reach heaven together. Kind of, it's still fear-based. And that sort of worries me because, you know, do we really want to motivate people through fear? Fear of instability, fear of unpredictability, which inevitably is what life's about. So, yeah, they make up stories to sort of cater for that, but it's still, you know, not a very solid foundation. So, yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
Shrikant, I think, yep.
Thank you, Dee. Hunter, if you would like to comment, you're welcome to do that.
Yeah, your comment about people sort of looking to return to an earlier age, it does seem like in response to the failures of postmodernism, such as they are, or their perceived failures, many people are thinking, okay, well, let's go back to the way things were before. Like, we're just going to forget that the modernists lost every debate. There's a little tiny trend, a new one right now. There are like some hot like influencer political types that are like converting to religions. And it's such a new trend that the next step hasn't happened yet. Like, nobody's actually gotten to the next step yet where they go, like, everybody's a little bit like, oh, really? That's unusual. That's why. But the next step is to go right back to the postmodern line and say, okay, what do you believe? Let's be clear. How do you know that? And as soon as that happens, what's going to happen again? Everybody's going to they're going to fail to give answers just like before. We can't undo postmodernism. There's no going back. On the other hand, well, actually, it's the same principle. If we buy into the idea of like falling empires, that we're maybe around a declining empire, we have to ask why every attempt to handle an empire in decline apparently failed in the past. What did they do when they saw things starting to decline? Well, presumably they tried to go back to the way things were before. And then the empire collapsed anyway. So if we're going to do better this time, we're going to have to avoid the like obvious strategy of trying to go back to what used to work. We're going to have to say, all the criticisms that you've levied against us have a lot of wisdom in them, actually. Like, you're making some really good points about what's been wrong with the empire. And if it's going to survive, it needs to integrate the wisdom of your criticisms against it. As far as fear goes, there's a whole complicated topic on that, but I'd say at least part of it is, well, yeah, love the fear though. You know, love and learn from the fear. Try to figure out, is there any place? Is there any proper place for this that isn't so, you know, negative? And maybe there's a somewhat redeemed version of fear that we can learn from and find a good place for it. It could even be that there's a version of fear that's so good that it's better than not having any fear at all. That we love our human capacity for fear and other negative emotions and find a way to integrate them into the fullest life possible. And this touches on the last point, which is this idea of how do we get people to accept it? Aren't they going to feel a lot of resistance? It's like, exactly. And we're going to tell them that their resistance is wise, and that they should love that resistance, that they should give it lots of energy and explore everything about it. And once they've done that, and once we've been willing to join in their perspective with them and give it its due for all the wisdom within it, that may be the pathway to them being slightly more open to what they're resisting. And so if we tell everybody, you're not willing to love, you're doing the wrong thing. Try to love, try to be a saintly, perfect, loving being. And if you're not, you're worse than all the ones that are. They're just going to have resistance. It's probably not going to go anywhere. But if we tell them it's fine, you have resistance, great, love it, then we're not working against them. And so maybe that's the same idea of the perverted love that makes enemies versus the love that is capable of turning those enemies into allies by really loving them first.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Hunter. So I wanted to now, everybody has spoken once, so I'm going to take my turn to speak here. I'm going to firstly ask the question, what kind of a thing is a meme? Because actually, many answers have been offered so far.
Yeah.
You know, you talked about love being a meme, which is an idea. You know, Manzur talked about a person being a meme. Remco talked about a narration, a story being the meme. David and Dee talked about religion, of a religious system as being a meme. And so all of these actually are memes. And they have the same, and I want to focus on the question of the winning meme, which is really the heart of it. Now, I personally come at it from the individual perspective, that a person is the meme, person is the medium, an individual is a medium, as a meme. So I want to explore everything that you have said from the perspective of person being a meme. So what kind of a person would be a winning meme? You talked about that it is one that firstly you want to go back to. You know, you want to imitate yourself. You know, you think of something you did and the person wants to keep doing that. Also, anybody whom they come in touch with wants to imitate that, considers it, and it produces a very large number of descendants or imitators of who they are as a person. Now, the interaction has to be such that the other person has to be getting a lot from it. That's the only way it works. So they have to kind of pour themselves out into other people and let other people pour themselves into them, so that they are taking in things from the other people, so that the next person that they're dealing with, actually, they have more to offer. So there is this tremendous give and take going on. So being open, and then being open to people as such, that is crucial. Not just your group of people, not just people who think your way, not just people who love what you love. And I'll come to love, a little bit later, but everybody, because that's the only way you're going to be able to firstly increase the place from which you learn, or the domain from which you learn, if you're open to everybody, and you are able to transmit whatever you have. Now, the thing is that you don't have to transmit everything, because it depends on the receiver or what they will receive, but they will receive some things. But if you are transmitting result of this entire conversation with humanity as such, as best as you can, then you have a chance of transmitting to almost everybody, because what you're transmitting, you have this tremendous repertoire. So, taking, like, for example, such a person has to be inviting but not compelling. It has to be, the other person has to say yes. You can ask people, you can, and you can knock on the door and say, here is what I offer you. And then see if they take it. And so you have to respect the core of the other person. So it's like in India, the idea is namaste. That means the God in me greets the God in you. And what that does is that it's like you're basically connecting to the other person at a core level. So all the superficial differences of who you are, how old you are, where you're coming from, what you think, kind of melt away when you establish that connection. So that would be one approach to it. It has to strengthen your career. You're giving a lot. You have to give a lot. That's the only way. And in some ways, winning is a misnomer. See, all these words have issues with it, because winning, automatically you think of like win versus lose. But here it is win-win. It's like, it's not just winning meme, it's win-win meme. Only that win-win meme can be a winning meme, because it has to generate, for it to be transmitted, it has to generate that. It has to, as you put it, it has to lift people up. It has to lift everybody up. Okay. You have to distribute glory. If you are trying to say, you talked about the absolute versus relative, you have to be relatively low in order to be absolutely high. So the high is low. It's kind of, it's like you're like the king of kings and servant of servants. You can be king of kings if you're servant of servant. So it's like only by paying attention to everybody and trying to learn from everybody, you can put together, you have the empathy, you have it to be able to do anything of any scale. The open to all followers, biggest coalition, that's also, one of the things. Now, let me come to the word love, because the problem with word love is that actually it refers to many, 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 many different things. Like, Greeks have many different words for it, and which are completely different from each other. And so love in modern times is a very, very problemsome word, because it generally refers to any kind of emotion, regardless of anything else. So I think it kind of, it because of that, discussion becomes difficult. So like, for example, they have like agape and eros and all kinds of, so there is a like feeling of friendship, which is one thing, where there is a feeling of equality and mutual respect of character, something like that. There is agape, which is like the love towards the universal, like this is the universal principle, and I love that. Then there is all kinds of other things. So I think distinguishing of all of those is necessary, because not all kinds of love are win-win. And therefore, not all kinds of love are winning me, but some kinds are. So being able to kind of carefully distinguish between those would be good. But I just love the presentation. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thanks, Shrikant. Yeah, there's the idea of the meme as a person. Like, I use the term decision procedure or game theoretical strategy on the idea that it's not just a meme like, oh, like maybe it's just like freedom or something. It's like freedom is the meme. It's like it's too simple of a meme. It can't properly respond to problems. So it needs to be a little bit more complicated and have a game theory that it follows, a decision procedure. Now, does it have to then be manifest in an actual person? In some sense, it hasn't won until it has, or until the world has sort of been affected by it. I'm really not sure. In some sense, it seems like if there was a person who embodied the winning meme, is the person the meme, or is the meme the meme? Or is there really a difference exactly? I'm not quite sure how to think about that.
May I say something?
Please.
I think it is like, you can look at it like, you can look at the same thing in two different ways. One, you can look at it as a principle, for example, like this is the winning principle. And then a person who embodies that. So that is like the manifestation of that principle in a person. Because ultimately, we're talking about human beings, and we're talking about transmission through human beings. So the carriers have to be human beings, and they have to transform the human being as such. So I think there is, on one hand, it's a principle, and on the other hand, it is a person. On the other hand, it's a story.
Yeah.
A story is a very powerful way of illustrating a person. On the other hand, it is a religion or of system of thought. So all of these are not contradictory to each other, but these are kind of different ways of slicing and dicing and looking at this as best as I can see.
Mind if I respond before we move on to the next person?
Please,
Yeah.
please take your time.
Thank you. Yeah. Part of the idea, again, like it's so easy to sound nice when you're talking about love. And then it switches a little bit when you're like, no, I mean like love hatred. I mean like love jealousy, like tolerate intolerance. I mean, you take the extreme version of that, and it's a principle something like, well, it's not God if it hasn't created a devil, which is a crazy idea. It's like this idea that the best thing creates the worst thing. Like, that's how accepting it is. It's like, is that too accepting? I don't know how to think about that. That's very radical love. And maybe, yeah, again, things like the love of power, like that's a dangerous game, man. But if you're unwilling to love power, is that the maximally successful strategy? I don't know. If you really you might really have to love everything. That's a very dangerous game. But it might, maybe it's the game. Maybe it's the right answer. I don't know.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Hunter, just fantastic presentation. Really, really loved it. Next up is going to be Chris, Remco, and Munzer. We're on to the second round, but if anybody who has not spoken before would like to chime in, you can go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom, and we'll give you preference. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to say something to the last comment about carriers have to be humans of the memes. And it reminded me of this thing I learned last year, that all of the cultures that have survived history have built their culture around myths and kind of lies rather than truth and fact. And the reason for that was that the truth and fact is too fragile. If we change language, if situation changes, then the fact is not relevant anymore, so it kind of collapses. While if we build it around some myth about some god up in the cloud, and you meet a stranger in the forest and you say, who do you believe created the universe? And they say, oh, the guy in the clouds. You can trust him. He's a part of your tribe, because no one else would know that kind of keyword to say that you belong. And that's what we do a lot today, like conspiracy theories often believe in all conspiracy theories, because really it's just a test of belonging. Do you belong to my group of rebels or not? They're not really talking about the facts. It's memes, and they're saying that I belong to this group, you belong to that group. So I think, yeah, it's important to recognize that the memes have to exist in people, and that's what creates culture in the end. But yeah, I want to have another shot at the finding this universal love, and I often, like, since I took on the idea of determinism 20 years ago, which I think is also in line with a lot of Buddhism, karma, like cause and effect, and it's kind of what I guess postmodernism recognize, in terms of anthropology. You have to study the instances of what plays out in history and cause and effect to truly understand what's going on. Don't try to abstract too early and find an ideal without studying the instances and how people actually live. And I think once you embrace that causality, you start realizing that I often find myself defending the murderer or defending the guy who did the worst things, because it's much more interesting to understand him. What caused him to do that, right? That's a much interesting challenge than what caused the victim to be murdered. It's like, bad luck, but the really interesting material to understand is really what caused the bad things, right? So that we can do something about it. And I think loving the puzzle of understanding rather than judging, I think it's a key, right? To that, finding the unity of all these subjective experiences. So I want to say one more thing, just addressing postmodernism directly, if I can.
Sure.
Go ahead.
And I think Remco would prove that this would play out in real time, the difference between someone who's a postmodern and someone who's not. When he's saying that, he saw his cage, and he now see power and hubris And it's all of this, like, he doesn't believe in love. It's all of this kind of aggressive language that shows that he believes that his side is the right one, while, you know, I've had arguments with him before. While I am the enemy, I have no idea what I'm talking about, right? Like, I am just the meta narrative, lost, and there is no bridge that I can try to understand him, but he does not even care to understand me. And I think that's very symptomatic of this kind of like when you're saying postmodernist narrative is necessary. I want to say, like, no, it's necessary that we come together and try to help people get out of that. Because once
Let me say one thing. I don't want to go too much on this one, but I just want to say one thing. What happens is that human beings are in different stages. I like Nietzsche's idea that, you know, there is a camel. People have a camel stage. The most modernists are in the camel stage. The you know, kind of postmodernists are in the lion stage, which is kind of tearing down things. And then obviously the real stage is the child stage, where you kind of have both those things in you and something more kind of opens itself. So that's it. But I don't want to go too much into criticism of individual people. That's not what we do here.
No, that's a good point. I'm sorry to criticize. I just thought it was interesting because I know he's going to attack me in the next second. So that's why I put it out there.
Please,
But
please,
you're right. You're right. It's about attacking postmodernism as a perspective.
Chris, and anybody else, look, we've been doing this meetups in 52 Living Ideas. The rule number 4 is that feel free to disagree with anybody on anything, but be courteous. Okay, so no attacking individual people. You can attack individual positions. Okay, but let us be respectful. But I hear you, and I think everybody has heard you what say, but that's not the focus of the meetup, because today we're talking about winning meme, and that is what our focus is. So that is the rule number 2, which is keeping on top. Okay, so really appreciate your comments, but the reason we do this, the reason for having this 4, is what we're trying to do is that we're trying to build a fire of discussion where everybody is focused to build a fire. And we're trying to add, each person is adding a log to it. When things go off into one different area, that fire is lost. And so I am kind of the kind of keeper of the fire. So that's what I'm trying to do, Chris. All right.
No, it's very good. I wasn't unaware of that. I was also a little bit preemptively putting this out there so that it wouldn't get through as well. But it was not necessary. I'm sorry.
Okay, you don't have to preemptively do anything like that. Thank you. Go ahead, Remco.
I think you're still
on mute. Oh, just a second. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, right. Yes, I couldn't unmute myself.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Look, yes, indeed. Where do I start? Yes, Shrikant. Yeah, people put things out, and it enables us to have somebody to discuss. I think it's very helpful, even if you, yeah. But look, I'm trying to get it back on track. Postmodernism, I love it. I love it. I love it with a passion, because, you know, I'm an old man now. I'm in my 70 years, and I look back at my life and I look at all those structures, all of those beautiful things that I adored and I used to talk about. And now I'm starting to see them for what they are. And I'm seeing structures everywhere. I see it in relativity theory, in quantum mechanics, the 2 topics I'm particularly interested in. And they're structures, beautiful structures, and we celebrate them. We salute them. They become religions. And so too, I see postmodernism in that trend. We're creating another religion. I don't have a problem to be naked and to stand here before you and say, I don't know and I don't care. Nihilism, which concerned Nietzsche so much with his God is dead statement, was a concern. Maybe I've just advanced, matured a little bit to be more comfortable on my own feet. I don't need any other religion. I love humanity, and I just don't need any seedings of ways of living, because I will reject it, because I don't need formats. I am who I am. And, you know, one of the beautiful things that my dear wife, who's just gone, you probably worked out that Di is my wife and she's in another room. You know, one of the things she taught me was the idea of appreciative inquiry. Appreciative inquiry. What is that, if you haven't heard of it? It's about the notion of nurturing the good things and ignoring the bad things. And if you see postmodernism as a bad thing, it's unnecessary. Just nurture what is actually working. And I think, you know, another way to put it is you don't worry about the weeds, focus and water the seeds. And if you see something out there that's working, nurture it. Don't worry about all the bogeys. You know, they're the memes. They're all the nasties that are out there. Don't worry about it. It's water off your duck's back, for me at least. But you can find your own way in life. And I think that is where the magic lies. To find your own way and just, you know, go through life never saying no, in my case, just allowing yourself to flow. And in particular, just to conclude, don't get, if you can get to that space, is to accept that the dominant conversation, and here today as well, the dominant conversation is binary. It's either this or it's either that. It's love or it is hate. The notion that the word love does not exist is uncomfortable, and I'm not forcing it. That's just my mantra. I don't need the word love. Just like I don't need you, just because I recognize it doesn't exist. Just like black doesn't exist. Just like cold doesn't exist. Just like inside. And you know, I mean, I suppose if you recognize that this is Advaita Vedanta, you know, the non-duality sort of thinking, and it's extremely liberating. Anyway, look, Hunter, in particular to you, I think, you know, you made a very passionate presentation. I love your spirit. I'd just be a little bit cautious about diminishing postmodernism. I think it's an extremely valuable tool because you need to have the devil identified, because postmodernism does that. It identifies it, and you can say, I sense hubris, just like I sense that in quantum mechanics with the Copenhagen interpretation, which is everybody's beating the drum of. And it can actually bypass it. Ludwig Wittgenstein gave a bypass to it. Anyway, I probably something.
You a many worlds man?
No, I'm not into narratives, and that's Everett's thesis. No need for that. Stay with Ludwig Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein offered a solution. It's languaging. And if you can be with languaging, then a lot of these things, the enigmas disappear. You don't need a myth, what Everett's thesis on the multiverse, many worlds is. It's a story, can't be proven, can't be disproved. It's great. It's a great solution. Go and live it if you want to, but I'm in the real world. I don't know what it is. Anyway, thank you. Great.
Thanks, Remco. All right, Hunter, if you want to say something, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, we'll go to Munzer.
Yeah. There's a principle that I think is helpful for dealing with resistance to things, whether it's the resistance to postmodernism or whatever it is. It's that you appreciate the resistance, right?
Come on, Chris.
What's that?
What's going on? Okay, no, go ahead.
All right. What was I saying about? I just forgot.
Resistance.
Resistance, yes, the resistance to postmodernism or whatever it may be. I would say start by sort of holding up the resistance as a hero. You know, learn from it, validate it. Then hold it up even higher, like treat it like an angel. That might be going too far, but a lot of people who really like the resistance might say, no, that's good too. And then you take it all the way up to a god, and you say, let us sacrifice everything else to this. Nothing is more important than this resistance. And then most people will say, that's going too far. And you can ask them why. And they'll start to give reasonable reasons that their resistance should not be taken too far and needs to incorporate the other perspective. And so I know in our culture, we have a strong emphasis on momentum, this idea that the more you do something, the more you're going to do it. But I think we need to ameliorate that with a more cybernetic approach. Treat it more like a hunger and say the more you feed it, the less it will need feeding. And if you feed something all the way, it'll often start giving away of its own accord.
Thank you, Hunter. Next up is going to be Munzer. Munzer, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm still looking for an answer to my question in my previous cycle, which I asked, what is the goal? Neither Hunter nor Shrikant said anything about that.
Okay.
I want to know, after I finish my comments, that what is the goal and what should be the goal? I don't have an answer for it. It's a question mark to my mind. So that's saying that. Second one, talking about this metaverse, postmodernism, this modernism, that modernism. Albert Einstein say this, but no more than that. Keep it simple, but don't try to make it simpler than what is necessary. All this ball of salad with a different term, postmodernism, this and that, doesn't make sense to me. Yeah, we have a time pass since the Big Bang, and we have evolved, we have acquired knowledge, we pass through different, there's no sharp line that, hey, before this is a postmodernism, after that post. We human beings, we think, we reason, and logic. So that one. Second one is winning. People talk here about winning. Oh, by the way, please don't forget the main item which I am bringing up. I would like to hear people addressing those main questions. So winning, the word winning makes sense only if I have a goal set. If there's a goal is not set, winning has no meaning whatsoever. Winning means toward the direction of my goal. Otherwise, winning means nothing. So I have to know what my goal is. So I want somebody to address that one too. Second one, I think Shrikant mentioned, to be high, you have to be low. I was listening carefully. So to me, actually, bottom line, when everything's said and done under the sun, it is you want to be on the top. The intermediate step, how to get to the top? Okay, you don't have to have a lot of money, not necessarily, but you want to be on the top. You have to be on the top, one way or the other. It's not necessarily only with the money or with the nuclear bomb or the power of the sword, but you want to be on the top. What should be the goal? To me, there are two possibilities. Somebody might add the third one too. One possibility is, all I want is understanding. That's it. Understand knowledge of the entire universe, mankind. And it's like a brain in a jar. No arm, no leg, no hand, no eyeball. It's pure brain, understanding a consciousness in a jar. Just understanding it. Maybe that could be one goal. Other goal, if that's not the goal, then other goal would be power, power, power. In other words, literally, I'm showing you, if you can see me, moving my finger, I can make people dance and have people do anything I want. End of the story. How do I get there? Could be with the power of a soul or with a lot of money. Whether it's a Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or the Twitter or other thing. You want people to do anything, everything I want. That does not necessarily mean that I will have people jump off the cliff just by moving my finger, just like this. That's called power. That does not mean I will do that, but I want to have that power. How to get that power is a different story. So the two alternatives I see about the goal. One is the power over others. Not only human beings, all life forms.
What are the two things? And then we'll have different people comment. What are the two things?
Okay, all right, that's why I'm done. Thank you.
No, what are the two things, Manzoor?
Oh, two things I mentioned. One is brain in the jar. All I want is the knowledge and understanding of the entire universe. That's one.
Got it. So one is knowledge and one is power.
One is the power. Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Money is a part of the power.
Yes.
Sword is a part of the power.
Let's have other people comment on it. So,
okay.
Yeah. So the question is, Hunter. Well, let's start with Hunter. Hunter, you have any thoughts about, on the questions that, I mean, not necessarily the answers, but because questions are far more important than the answers. So, any thoughts on the questions that Manzoor has put forth?
With regards to winning, I'm not sure that you need to define a goal in the sense that memetics is comparable to genetics. and that at the end of the day, whatever propagates, propagates. Do you want to call propagation victory? You don't have to. Do you want to call it failure? You can. But at the end of the day, whatever propagates is what's around. It doesn't, you can call it whatever you want, but the rule is whatever is stable, whatever spreads, whatever can keep itself around is what exists. And that's really what I mean by winning meme. I just mean the one that propagates most successfully, or whatever, just the one that propagates the most. In terms of what the goal of metamodernism or the winning meme sort of an idea is, I kind of said there isn't one, like we're not trying to give answers. We can't prove anything. That's a take. If I were talking to a 10-year-old, though, I'd probably just say something like, we're trying to work together more effectively and solve the problems that we're already trying to solve, but failing to solve. We're just trying to do it successfully this time.
Thank you. Let's go with, I just want to ask people who have not spoken before. Jeannie, what do you think of the presentation? Jeannie or Kevin or anybody else who wants to, who has not spoken before? If you could let us know what you thought of the presentation, because we are now coming to the wrap-up part. Would love to get feedback. Jeannie, what did you think? You can go ahead and unmute.
Hunter, I really enjoyed the presentation. I've always been very curious about what postmodernism is supposed to be about, because I lived through it, and yet I had very little idea of what I was supposed to be doing. So, but I did want to offer something as number one, a goal. Just seems pretty basic to me. Like, how about the survival of our species and the other species on Earth? That would be pretty good. Then as far as another trait that you might consider is fun. Is this something that's going to be engaging to people? And I have to say, just like sort of as an example, SEPTA, which is a transportation system here in Philadelphia, found that if children ride the bus, then they will develop a habit and eventually end up as adults riding the bus. Whereas many adults will not initially start to ride the bus as adults. And they're very unhappy, fearful, and, they just don't want to do it. So one of the things, I think that's important is to, number one, engage the kids, and number two, make it fun for people that they'll want to do this. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent presentation, Hunter. And I've always been curious about it.
Thank you very much, Jeannie.
Thank you, Jeannie. Anybody else who has not commented would like to comment at this point? Okay, so if you want to do that, you can just go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. So Hunter, what's next? I really love this presentation. I think would love to, kind of see what directions you would like to take it from here. What are your thoughts? You want to give it some thought and then talk later?
I could throw around a few ideas, but
Sure.
I haven't one, and so maybe I better come back to it later.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, so let's go with Josh next. Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to miss a big chunk of the conversation here, so I don't know what's been said, but I'm going to give a stab at it because I am familiar with, the whole terrain of postmodernism, whatever that means. So let me suggest what it means to me. I think maybe the most interesting examples of postmodern thinking would include, post-structurists like Foucault and Deleuze and Derrida and even Heidegger. But closer to Hunter's presentation would be people within the who are interested in cognitive psychology and coming at it maybe from a philosophical vantage. So that would include people that call themselves enactivists or interested in embodied approaches to cognitive science. And the reason that I mention that is because many of them, like Sean Gallagher, would consider themselves postmodernists. Dan Zahavi is another example of somebody who, who would put himself in that camp. And I think that an argument that they would make would be that the motivation for the postmodernism that they embrace is not skepticism. On the contrary, they would argue that it's precisely the modernist notions that assume, some sort of objective basis, that embrace certain causal sorts of modern models, scientific models. That objectivism is what courts skepticism intrinsically, because it wants to ground itself in some access to truth, and it does it by trying to reach out from a subject to an objective world, and so there's always doubt that seeps in. I mean, that was Descartes', his reason for trying to eliminate doubt by grounding everything in subjectivity. So for an activist approaches and other approaches within postmodernism, they say that they avoid the notion of skepticism because they eliminate this question arc between the subject and the this world out there that that we're supposedly trying to represent and are trying to do it accurately. Or as Hunter said, he said, well, we have questions that we can't assume that we can answer them. And I guess the postmodern orientation would say, well, what's interesting to them is how whether we can answer questions or not is obviously a function of which questions we ask, and that's where all the interesting things happen, is how questions change, and that's their interest, is how it is that we change the subject all the time. And so what gets us into trouble in terms of getting along with each other has to do with different questions that are being asked rather than having the same question in front of us and coming up with different answers. Is that we're asking different questions, and so you have different worlds, and so it says the challenge then of navigating all those different worlds is one of having an openness to not only not having answers, but not even necessarily guaranteeing that we can fully understand what questions are being asked by that community on the other side there. So anyway, I think I've said enough, and
well, thank you, Josh. Really appreciate the comments. I mean, Hunter, I think we got a really good group of people here. They're just engaging with the material that you put on the table really well, and they're bringing everything that they know to the conversation. So really appreciate that. Hunter, if you want to comment, you can go ahead. Otherwise, we'll go to Chris next.
Yeah, I'll say what you were saying makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of the modernist systems had a tendency to promote faith in themselves, and that meant rejecting all the other systems. This is your religion, maybe you're not very open to the other religions. And postmodernism did come along and kind of erode that faith, which on the one hand meant that we stopped having any system, and on the other hand meant we were at least willing to look at all the other systems. The problem is just a little bit that all of them seem to fall for the same postmodern analysis. So we end up exactly as you're talking about, in this place of, again, I mean, I more or less, I think, buy into the philosophical analysis that all knowledge is based on unprovable axioms, and therefore we don't really know like anything, like not even the past, the memories, the nature of reality. We're in this sort of radical ignorance on some level. And some of my thinking has been informed by starting from the point of supposing you can't think or you can't know anything, and then being like, okay, now what? How do you, and at that point, you're just working on hope, I guess, because if you can't know anything, you're basically just sort of like, I hope that the way that seems reasonable for me to relate to what I perceive to be some kind of world thing I'm dealing with won't like mysteriously backfire. but I can't prove it won't at all. And I'm just sort of hopefully sort of acting with faith that maybe what seems reasonable is reasonable as a way to react to things.
Thank you, Hunter. Next up is Chris. Chris, go ahead.
Yes, I really like the previous speaker when he was saying how, I guess it does make sense that most people critique modern perspective because they are skeptical of you going beyond culture and creating some kind of objectivity or universalism about beliefs. And I think that's right. Like, that is where people turn against it, and the vast majority of people truly do, because we are brainwashed since, you know, the 50s, since globalization kind of started with getting along with each other, just accept people for who they are, and this was our strategy. But it's not true, though, that relativism helps us escape this. Because if you get to that perspective, we have all these subjective experiences, subjective cultures. You can't go beyond that and reach objective truth. But then you are claiming that you know that all perspectives are just relative, and that cultural and individual difference is the best we can do. Because that's what relativism is saying. Relativism is saying we can't go beyond culture, we can't go beyond subjectivity. But then somehow they are claiming to do that when they claim that relativism is true for everyone. It's universally true and it's objectively true. So relativism is self-contradictory. And when I studied philosophy of science, they talk a lot about the postmodern perspective on how it's influenced science and all these things. And they basically said in 1950 with Willard Quine, the serious philosophers of science who are trying to figure out how to get to the truth, which is independent from subjective experience. Like, Quine did that really well. So if you want to know how to escape this kind of subjectivism, Willard Quine, 1950s, he wrote a book, Two Dogmas of Empiricism. That's when, in the field of philosophy of science, they basically declared postmodernism dead as a serious intellectual school of thought. While in culture and art and stories, of course, it can survive forever. But when you're trying to do epistemology, you have to have higher standards than that, because there are obviously some fact statements that are more likely to be true than others, right? If I say this table is here, or I say that this table is really a dinosaur, it's not completely relative which statement is more likely to be right. Is the table a dinosaur, or is it just a table of wood, right? So we already kind of escaped. It's not completely relativism. Something is more likely to be true than other statements. That I think everyone would agree on that if they don't try to be so, I don't know, got you kind of philosophy. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. So what we'll do is that we are kind of coming to the end of the conversation. So Josh, go ahead, and then we will go ahead and wrap up.
There is a way of thinking about knowledge, which rather than thinking in terms of beliefs and true or false propositions and epistemology, focuses on what's called skilled coping, which is a different way of thinking about it's contextual, and it's what we do when we're working on a task. And we're not intellectualizing the task. We're not putting it into conceptual terms. We're simply, as we're going along, we're adjusting our thinking in response to the changing response of the situation we're working in the midst of. And there are a number of writers. Wittgenstein, the later Wittgenstein, was certainly a good example of this way of thinking. That would suggest that the kind of abstract notion of knowledge is really derived and secondary to skilled coping, unreflective skilled coping. But that abstract notion that we have of propositional knowledge, even though it's derived, it sort of masks what it's based on, which is not something that has to do with starting with using language in a conceptual, propositional, logical way, but rather, and like I say, in a context-dependent way which adjusts itself as it goes along. Hunter mentioned the idea of, these basic questions concerning, whether, basic facts about our relation to the world are true. But from the skilled coping point of view, it's a given. We are in the world to begin with. It's not, it doesn't start out as a question. We wouldn't, what generates our curiosity and our function to begin with is that we're already ensconced in a web of relationships within a world. It's not something that we have to, it's not an achievement. It's a precondition for anything. So in terms of the notion of a postmodernism is denying that, the relativism doesn't mean that there's no way of being able to make decisions. On the contrary, because we are ensconced, like us right now, to be able to have a conversation, even though we have different backgrounds and such, the language that allows us to be able to talk with each other allows us, each of us, to adjust the sense of the meaning of what's taking place on the basis of the interaction itself. So we're sort of unfolding an understanding as we go along contextually. And that's kind of a postmodern notion. And in fact, it allows us to have a much more intimate and intricate sense of understanding than the abstract notion of knowledge that starts with the Cartesian doubt of, oh, is there really a world and do we have access to it? I mean, those are abstractions that we don't really function on the basis of, but we concocted them, and they were very useful for the purposes of doing certain sciences, but they're becoming less and less useful, particularly for the social sciences and for psychology, which far from moving away from those most postmodern notions, is that if you look at the popularity these days of embodied approaches to psychology, they're becoming more widespread. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Josh. All right, Hunter, any final thoughts? I mean, I really like, Josh, your point, because like many of the kind of philosophies, they kind of look at action, thoughts, and emotions all together and as flowing into each other. So that gives a level of stability to your thought, because you have the action, it's like thoughts kind of come from action and go into action. So there is this feedback mechanism, and so do emotions. So you kind of treating them separately, away from the other two, any of them actually fails, because you can't really be doing action without some conception about it, without some motivation from it. You can't be doing thinking which is dissociated from the action that you are in constant. And you can't be doing that if you have no feeling at all about it. So going back and forth between that provides a very robust feedback mechanism within yourself. So wonderful point. Thank you. All right, Hunter, any final comments?
I think that's perfect. That's a great place to leave it.
Excellent. So Hunter, really, really love this presentation. So look forward to the next one in 2 weeks. So we do this every 2 weeks. So, and the main meetup here that is organizing this is 52 Living Ideas. We do meetups every day. On Mondays, we do collaborative poetry. On Tuesdays, we do Dao De Jing, where 2 people are translating Dao De Jing just for our group. On Wednesdays, we look at the themes of comprehensivism, of how do we kind of take in all the different fields and learn from all the different fields. On Thursdays, we have sometimes a self-improvement, and we have some slots available. On Fridays, we do Metamodernism and Jungian thought. So we get some of the Jungian experts talking about Jung. The next one is going to be, I think, one of the ones coming up is going to be Muriel McMahon is going to be talking about the journey of individuation as a spiritual journey. So it's a very, very interesting range of things. On Saturdays, we do Asian philosophy, and on Sundays, we are going through a book by Athanasius called On the Incarnation. So it's a very large, repertoire of things. So if you are not already member of 52 Living Ideas, you can search for 52 Living Ideas on Meetup, and please join, and to explore all these meetups. And thank you very much, everybody. I love the dialogue. I love the fact that each person kind of came to it with their own thoughts and was able to kind of interact with the core idea that that Hunter was putting forth. And I think it's a great way of learning. Clearly, we are kind of the beginning stages of exploring this idea. And the more we explore it, more of us interact with it, we'll be able to get more from it. So you are a crucial part of making that happen. So look forward to seeing you next time.
I just want to interrupt to echo that and say that, like, every time I do this, I walk away with ideas that were not part of my mind before. So this is a great part of refining and processing all of it.
Exactly. And I think this is the right formula, right format to be doing this. That you can't do this by just sitting in your room,
Yeah.
Kind of coming up with things. It just kind of speaking out the best that you have in whatever form you have. One of the memes that I like very much is, I think Sapolsky uses it, strong ideas weakly held. It's like strong opinions weakly held. So you need to say, okay, this, I think, as best as I can tell, this is the most important thing I can think of, but you hold it weakly. So that means that you're actually looking for evidence that contradicts. Most people look for evidence that will support them. Here, you're looking for evidence that will prove you wrong, because that's the way of building things which are scalable. So thank you very much, Hunter, for doing this series. Really appreciate that. Take care.
Thank you for content.